I had lived alone for several years now, since the passing of my beloved husband, Daniel. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, had grown quiet. I had never been blessed with children, and after Daniel was gone, my life became one of routine, marked by solitary meals and long nights, with only my thoughts for company. It wasn't always this way. I was once a woman of education, accomplishment, and dreams. Daniel and I were well respected in our small town. He was a businessman, a good one, and I taught at the local university. We had traveled, donated to charity, and lived the kind of life that, from the outside, seemed blessed. But when Daniel passed, everything crumbled. The business went under due to some poor decisions, and bills began to pile up. In a short time, I found myself losing not just the man I loved, but also the security we had built together. Now, most of my days were spent in the company of books and memories, until one rainy afternoon that would change my life forever. It was the kind of autumn day that seeps into your bones, the sky heavy with clouds, the wind cold and biting. I was on my way home from the market, carrying what little I could afford, when I noticed a woman standing by the entrance of a narrow alley. She was huddled against the wall, shielding a young girl from the rain with her worn coat. The sight tugged at something deep inside me, a memory perhaps of days long past when I used to help Daniel with our charity work, offering warmth to those who had none. I had no money to give her, for my own pockets were nearly empty. Yet something in her eyes made me stop. It wasn't just desperation, it was something quieter, something more familiar. Dignity, I realized, even in her current state. I approached her slowly. "Do you need some help?" I asked gently. The woman looked up, startled by my voice. Her face was pale and gaunt, her clothes soaked through. But when she spoke, her voice was steady, if weary. I I don't want to trouble you," she said, glancing at the little girl, who was clutching her coat tightly. "We just need some food." I hesitated for only a moment before deciding. "I don't have any money to give," I admitted. "But would you both like to come to my house for a meal?" The woman's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment I thought she might refuse. But the little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Please, Mama, I'm so hungry." The woman nodded slowly, gratefulness and reluctance both clear in her expression. "Thank you," she said softly. "We won't be any trouble." We walked back to my house in silence. The little girl, her name was Sarah, I would later learn, skipping ahead slightly, though her movements were slow with exhaustion. The woman introduced herself as Anna. Her voice was soft, and there was a refinement to the way she spoke that struck me as odd. This was no ordinary beggar, I realized. As we entered my small but tidy home, I noticed Anna looking around with a kind of quiet appreciation, though she said nothing. I set about preparing the meal. Nothing fancy, just a simple stew that I had planned for myself. I added extra bread and some fruit for the child, and soon the kitchen was filled with the comforting smell of food cooking. The girl, Sarah, sat at the table with wide eyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was polite, remarkably so for a child of her apparent circumstances. "Thank you, ma'am," she said quietly, when I placed a plate in front of her. I couldn't help but smile at her. As we ate, I learned more about Anna and her story. She was not what I had expected. Anna was educated, like me. She had once been a teacher, too, though she taught in a different city, far from here. Her husband had died a few years ago in an accident, and without his income, she had been unable to support herself and her daughter. The school where she taught had shut down shortly after due to budget cuts, and with no family to help, Anna had found herself on the streets, struggling to survive. "I never thought it would come to this," she said quietly, her eyes downcast. "We had a good life once. But now, I can't even give my daughter the basics. It's been hard." I felt a deep sense of connection to her story. We were both women who had lost everything after our husbands had passed, forced to navigate a world that seemed indifferent to our suffering. Yet, despite her hardships, Anna had not given up. She carried herself with grace, even in her despair, and her daughter, so polite, so intelligent, was a testament to her strength as a mother. The conversation flowed easily between us as we finished our meal, and I found myself enjoying their company more than I had expected. Sarah, though quiet, had a sharp mind and a quick wit. When I asked her about school, she told me how much she loved to learn, despite the fact that she hadn't been to a proper classroom in months. "She's very bright," Anna said with a soft smile, running her fingers through Sarah's hair. "I wish I could give her more opportunities." A thought began to form in my mind as I watched them. Here was this bright, eager little girl and her strong, resilient mother. They had nothing but each other, and yet they had managed to hold on to their dignity, their kindness, and their hope. And here was I, alone in this house with more space than I needed, and more loneliness than I could bear. "You know," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "I have an extra room, and it gets so quiet here. If you and Sarah need a place to stay, even just for a little while, you're welcome to stay here." Anna looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "I couldn't," she whispered. "You've already done so much." "It wouldn't be any trouble," I insisted. I could use the company." Anna hesitated, looking down at her daughter, then back at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. "I'm sure." Tears filled Anna's eyes as she reached across the table to take my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." "There's nothing to repay," I said softly. "We all need a little help sometimes." And so, Anna and Sarah moved in. At first, it was a strange adjustment. I had grown so used to living alone that having others in the house felt foreign. But slowly, we settled into a routine. Anna helped with the cooking and cleaning, and Sarah filled the house with laughter and curiosity. Over time, I began to see the changes in all of us. The house, once so quiet, was now filled with life again. I found myself looking forward to our meals together, to the conversations that flowed easily between Anna and me. And Sarah, sweet, smart Sarah, became like the child I had never had. I helped her with her lessons, teaching her to read and write, and in return, she brought a joy to my life that I had long thought lost. As the months passed, we became a family. Not by blood, but by choice, by circumstance, by the simple act of kindness that had brought us together. And though we had all lost so much, we had found something even more valuable, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of love. Anna eventually found work again, and though our lives were far from perfect, we had each other. We had a home, a place where we could heal, where we could rebuild. And as I sat by the fire one evening, listening to Sarah read aloud from one of my old books, I realized that I had gained something far more precious than I had ever lost. I had found hope again,